is Talk.
Hello, welcome back. This is Talk. Sorry, I was just gossiping there with Matthew Hulbert and Jack Rowlett, who are with me. Matthew is a Lib Dem activist and indeed host of Political Frenemies podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for mentioning my new podcast.
That's all right. And Jack Rowlett is a political commentator. There is quite a lot around about Greg Wallace, and I just want to read out a comment from Mary in County Down, who says, why did the BBC not ask St Kirsty of Wark, of course the former Newsnight presenter, one of the most rigorous, fearsome interviewers who has faced down many a bully and unpleasant person in studio, why she didn't challenge Wallace for his unacceptable behaviour on Celebrity MasterChef? And can we hear from all his co-presenters? Did none of them challenge him or complain on air? They're very sharp-tongued, even quite rude, but couldn't say anything about his behaviour. The whole thing stinks. A conspiracy of silence and acquiescence. Or were they all just concerned about their own payday? Well, certainly there are many people who don't say things because they're worried about their own position in broadcasting. I have been in that position myself, not at this company, I hasten to add, but in previous jobs I've been around people who are perhaps too big to fail, some would say, who have exhibited absolutely horrendous behaviour and totally unprofessional behaviour. I've seen that. Matthew and Jack, what do you make of this Greg Wallace scandal? Because there are so many more things that come out. We should say, just for legal reasons, we've got to clarify that Greg Wallace's lawyers have said that he denies any sexual impropriety, but today he stands accused of 3 sexual assaults, and the fact, which is perhaps the most pertinent point of all of this, was that the BBC was warned 12 years ago. Jack?
Yeah, well, I mean, the allegations are appalling, it's shocking, and you'd really like to think...
Is it shocking?
Well, maybe it isn't. I mean, you'd really like to think that at this point, we've had so many scandals, so many different stars in the past, decade, 15 years or so, that at this point, that these would stop occurring because people would feel able to speak out. It's an institutional failure, really, in broadcasting, that you've still got this being allowed to happen, and it is, I think, the responsibility of senior management to be stopping this from happening, to be calling it out, because you've got more junior people who aren't necessarily in a position to do so. They have a lot more to lose. They're on much lower salaries. It's not reasonable to expect them to do so, and they're often the ones who are on the receiving end of bullying or sexual harassment. So I do think it's absolutely appalling, and it really reflects the fact that we haven't made anywhere near as much progress as I think a lot of us would like to think we have.
Should say that MasterChef is made by a company called Banijay. It's a production company and made for the BBC. They said on Thursday, while these complaints have not raised the allegations directly with our show producer, complainants have not raised the allegations directly with our show producers or parent company Banijay UK, we feel that it is appropriate to conduct an immediate external review to fully and impartially investigate. While this review is underway, Greg Wallace will be stepping away from his role on MasterChef and is committed to fully cooperating with the process. The BBC has said, we take any issues that are raised with us seriously, and we have robust processes in place to deal with them. I mean, they don't, do they?
Well, it sounds as if they don't. I mean, I agree wholeheartedly with Jack. These sound like really bad things that have allegedly happened. I mean, just on your text there, and I hope this wasn't what they were intending on doing, but in terms of Kirsty Walk, I mean, that did sound a little bit like victim blaming. I mean, we weren't in that situation.
She's not a victim, though.
We were... Well...
She's not alleging that she's been sexually assaulted. She says that she was around and in the room when he made these horrible comments.
Yeah, but we don't know what the feeling. Well, we don't know how. All I'm saying is that this. If it's true, this is all on Greg Wallace. It's not on anyone else. This is all on Greg Wallace.
Well, it is on other people. It is on other people as well.
Yeah.
It's on BBC management.
Yeah.
It's on management of the production company.
Yeah.
But it is also, I mean, you have people like Kirsty Walker, who I work with. I know her a bit. I respect her a lot. She's speaking up now, but the question may well be, well, why didn't you speak up previously? But also, within that, we have the fact that Emma Kennedy, who was someone who appeared on Celebrity MasterChef, did speak up 12 years ago, did make a complaint, and unsurprisingly, nothing was done. The talent, as they call it, the presenter, was absolutely cosseted from this, and Greg Wallace was allowed to continue to present that programme for over a decade.
I mean, the strange thing for me is that apparently, allegedly, he'd have these interactions where he did his banter, as he wants to call it, I hate that word, and then asked for those bits to be not shown in the programme. Now, I absolutely take Jack's point that producers, etc., can be quite low down on the pecking order of the BBC, and they may have not felt that they could have challenged that. But did no one hire? Surely people higher up must have been aware that this was happening. and that he was asking for bits that might have embarrassed him to not be put out on air.
You're absolutely right on that point. And Lorraine Hegasy, who's I think a former director of television for the BBC, certainly a very, very senior person, said it no longer there, says it is inconceivable that bosses didn't know about this. And that raises many, many questions, not just about Greg Wallace himself, but about management of the production company and the BBC.
Yeah, it does. I think also, I think it's really important to take into account the fact that the kind of power dynamics can shift, and you can have someone like Kirsty Walker, who's obviously, you know, a powerful, influential figure in one way, but if she's the only person in the room who, you know, speaks out on that, then that puts her in a very difficult position, and that potentially, you know, harms her job, harms her career progress. You know, so I think it's unfair to blame individuals other than Greg Wallace if the allegations are true. It is more of a systemic failure, and it's the type of systemic failure that we have seen over and over and over again. And until broadcasting companies get their house in order and have proper independent complaints procedures that people have faith and trust in, we're going to see this happen over and over again.
And don't you think as well, Peter, and again, maybe this is right, maybe this is wrong, but I worked in radio about 20 years ago now, gosh, I'm so old, and there was sometimes a feeling in radio newsrooms that, sorry, that's just a bit what he's like, and sorry about that.
Creative tension.
Yeah, absolutely. And just kind of, oh no, it's not good, is it? None of us are really happy about it, but it's just what he's like. And I'm not saying it should be like that.
You didn't see this kind of behaviour, though. I mean, there's a difference between... Look, I would argue, having worked in broadcasting for sort of on and off really for about 15 years, nearer 20 years probably, that you know, journalism is full, and broadcasting is full of eccentrics. It's full of people whose you know, sometimes their personality is part of their job. I mean, the people who present shows on TV, and perhaps I'm one of them as well in this regard, you know, are not straightforwardly normal people. Otherwise you wouldn't do the job, and you wouldn't be someone who they want to do the job. I mean, it is full of eccentrics. I would say myself maybe a bit of an eccentric as well, and actually that's part of it. But there is a difference between knowing right and wrong. I'm not saying I'm Mother Teresa, I've never made a mistake. Of course I have. But this kind of alleged behaviour over and over and over again, management would have known, and management apparently did nothing about it, and that's the point.
I agree. I wholeheartedly agree. There isn't a dispute here, but I'm just thinking that, we can institutionally blame the BBC, but when these figures are so popular, right, in the general populace, which obviously Greg Wallace has been and may continue to be, who knows, it does become, rightly or wrongly, it does become difficult for anyone to have that hard conversation with him. I'm not saying it shouldn't have happened.
No,
because clearly it
should.
But it becomes difficult.
But that's on both of them as well, because that person is allowed to get away with that, and they push the boat out, they push the boundaries one time. I mean, I remember there's a couple of times when one particular boss, one thing was said and came down on me like a ton of bricks, and I would never ever say anything like that again. Right. It wasn't that bad, but I'd mark my card, and that's fine, and that's what managers are there to do. But the fact is that the bigger the star, the less often the case, the less scrutiny is actually put on them. It's a really interesting debate. We'll continue it in just a second. There's quite a lot of people getting in touch about greetings cards, believe it or not. I didn't expect this one to take off, but it has. Jack says, I always Tipp-X out greetings on Christmas cards sent to me and resend them to others the next year. I don't put stamps on them, so if they want, the recipients have to pay. Jack, are you being totally serious? I'm not sure you are. Penny in Essex says, good morning, Peter the Great. Thank you, Penny. You don't need to call me that. Regarding stamps, I bought 48 second-class stamps the other day for Christmas cards, and a few second-class large stamps as well. £51. I love cards. I'm a card person and would be sooner have a card than a present. They must be beautiful cards, though. I often spend £6 plus on a card for special friends. It's exciting to open a card wondering who it's from if you don't recognise the writing. £6 on a card. Maybe that's the true cost of Christmas. I try to get the ones that are sort of, you know, I don't know, £4 or 10 or whatever. Louise Hay says Mick was employed as a police officer. Well, she was a special constable actually, and at an insurance company prior to being charged with fraud. Was it premeditated? Well, we don't know. And Louise Hay, of course, has been convicted, and that is a spent conviction anyway. But we'll continue to talk about that, including with the panel, in just a few minutes here on Talk.
on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Right then, we've talked about Greg Wallace, and if you want to make your points on that, give me a shout, 0344 499 1000. You can also text me at 72222, send me a WhatsApp on the main number. You can send me a WhatsApp voice message as well. You tweet me at TalkTV, follow me at Peter Cardwell. A few people saying like Greg Wallace was only making jokes. Look, it's a lot more than that. It's a heck of a lot more than that. This is, I mean, Matthew Holberg is still with me, and Jack Rowlett as well, but Matthew says he hates the word banter, but there is a definite difference between workplace banter and what Greg Wallace was alleged to have been up to, even some of the remarks and stuff. I mean, it would be inconceivable to make a racist remark, basically, in a workplace, most workplaces these days, anyway, and that is what he is alleged to have done. And I mean, it wasn't as if he was making a sexist joke necessarily. He was allegedly grouping people. He was allegedly dancing around the MasterChef set, wearing only a sock on a part of his anatomy. I mean, that's not banter. That's not jokes. That's something entirely different. Sarah's in West Sussex, and she says, "Morning, Peter. Great show. Just listening to Greg Wallace chat with your guest. The thing that gets me is, you think, wouldn't you, that if he was allegedly running around naked wearing nothing but a sock, someone might have noticed and said something. Personally, and obviously I don't know him, I've always found him uncomfortable to watch on the TV screen, so the allegations do not surprise me. But why do people not speak up? How many BBC employees is it now who have ended up in hot water one way or another?" Sarah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the thing is, Sarah, to answer your point, I mean, I've been a very junior employee on certain programmes. I've been a more senior person. And actually, Kirsty Wark, in fairness to her, we're perhaps a little bit critical of her beforehand, but to be fair to her, she had said, look, she was appearing in Celebrity MasterChef. It wasn't absolutely crucial to her to do so, although she received money to do so, but it wasn't a matter of paying her mortgage or not paying her mortgage. If you're in the very, very, I mean, Matthew, you know a bit about this, having worked in the media as well, it's a very insecure profession. Things change all the time. You know, one day you're cock of the walk, the next you're a feather duster. And actually, for a lot of these people who were the runners, the researchers, the producers and so on, they were not incentivised to speak up, especially against a presenter. So my sympathies are a little bit with them, actually. And you know, we know that one of the actual contestants of Celebrity MasterChef, Emma Kennedy, did speak up about this 12 years ago. What happened? Nada. He continued to present the programme. Right then, I want to talk about sickfluencers. Yes, it's a horrible portmanteau, but this is people who are on TikTok, on YouTube and so on, helping their followers claiming benefits. We now have 15,000 new people every single week going on the sick. I have absolutely no problem with people who are genuinely unwell receiving benefits. No issue with that. But many, 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 many more people are receiving benefits than were before the pandemic. The pandemic, of course, had something, and the lockdowns certainly had something to do with that. But what do you make of these sickfluencers, Jack? These people going online saying, fill in this form, say these certain things, and you'll get benefits.
Well, I don't really have much of a problem with the, quote, sickfluencers themselves. I mean, ultimately, they are only guiding people through a government-designed process using a government-designed framework.
But if they're encouraging them to exaggerate or talk about, you know, suicidal ideation, for example, that's not ethical, is it?
I think the problem is, too often previously, we've had these really opaque processes that disabled people and sick people really struggle to access and work their way through, and they don't know what to say and what not to say, and as a result lots of those people have not had access to government support previously. And I think what those sickfluencers were, many of them were trying to say was, you know, if you have had suicidal thoughts, make sure you mention that. Certainly I know the ones in the Times story deny that they're encouraging people to claim illegitimately. I think the real problem, the real story here, is if you listen to the people running the assessment, so that those are the people doing it for the government, you know, they're saying, we don't feel this process is morally just because we're not given the time to actually view each case properly, and they're incentivized, they get financial incentives to go through cases as quickly as possible. Well, if that's the incentive structure you've got, you are always going to have, you know, cases being determined in a way that isn't fair, whether that's people getting money that shouldn't have it, or whether that's people who really do need support not getting it either.
Matthew?
I largely agree. I mean, it does sound to me that, you know, this is basically largely signposting people to who, you know, are perfectly entitled to claim benefits to know what to do, and it can be a really hard system to navigate, as Jack quite rightly says. I worry that stories like this feeds into a kind of demonisation of people on benefits. Now, let me just say straight off that I'm sure there are those, I'd like to think a minority, that try and play the system, and of course those people should be rooted out and dealt with.
Well, it's legitimate to talk about it, isn't it, Matthew?
Yep,
because you've got 15,000 people awake, many more than in the pandemic. It was about 1,000 a day, a working day, during the pandemic. Now it's more like 2,500 per working day. And actually, that is really, really worrying for a society. Aside from the financial aspect of it, aside from the fact that they're taking hard-working taxpayers' money, and as I say, that's fine. If you're genuinely ill, that's okay. But actually, there are lots of people who've never, quite literally never worked a day in their life. Lots of young people going on the sick for lots of different reasons. And that in itself, I think, should concern us a lot more. Because we've got to get people, there's a lot of dignity in work, getting up, going to work every day. There's a lot of, it's very good for your mental health. You're interacting with people a lot of the time. We've got to get people back to work. We've got to increase productivity. How do we do that?
Absolutely should. And, Liz Kendall, the DWP secretary, is tasked with that. And I think she's quite, I've always thought of her as quite, and I mean this in the nicest possible way, but quite a fierce character. And I think, I don't think she'll truck any nonsense from people. And I think she'll be wanting to clamp down perhaps a bit harder than I personally, as a soppy liberal, would actually want her to be doing. But I think she'll be quite hard on people. And I think people have to show that they're looking for work unless they are really very, very sick indeed. So, I don't actually think that this government is going to be kind of soft on them. But then I also think, and this goes back to a point that Jack was making, that you think about the winter fuel allowance and the whole issue around that, and part of the problem with that is that a lot of older people hadn't been claiming a benefit that would have meant they wouldn't have been affected by that. So there's no doubt that people do need to be signposted to what they're perfectly legally entitled to, and making sure that they're claiming those things. But also, as Jack says, the government has then got to make sure that if you want people to be claiming things they're entitled to, that the forms are relatively easy to fill out, instead of it all being really difficult.
But if someone's going to go on the sick, essentially, if someone's going to receive benefits for life for a very, very long period of time,
shouldn't be the case.
That should be a rigorous process, shouldn't it? Yeah.
That should absolutely be a rigorous process. But I have to say, I've had a couple of times in my life, so I talked about working for the radio. I was then subsequently sadly made redundant, along with a whole lot of people, when a new boss came in. And so, I had to claim for a while, and I absolutely hated it. I couldn't wait to get any job to get off that. Quite how people stay as part of that system for life when you're kind of talked down to by some of the DWP people and treated like not a very good thing. Quite how people stay in that system persistently.
Did that help you when you're unemployed? Did you feel you were actually being helped back into work?
I went out and found myself a job. It wasn't very little help at all. It's a very long time ago now.
Yeah.
But I didn't think there was any help at all. So, I think it has to be carrot and stick with a system like this.
Have you ever been unemployed, Jack?
No.
Okay.
No, well, when I was a student.
Yeah, well, of course, that's not quite the same. Yeah.
No, I think there is a real problem where there isn't a ladder of support.
Right.
You would like this, personal independence payments and these sickness benefits. That's the top of the ladder. That's for people who are, who need the most help.
Yeah.
And then you have all sorts of interventions between there and the top of the ladder for people who, maybe they need some therapy, maybe they need some job coaching, maybe it's the case that they're on an NHS waiting list and they need an operation. So you have all sorts of interventions that need to take place before you get to that level. And unfortunately, all of those levels on the ladder have been cut out, because state capacity has been so gutted. So you have a lot of people actually claiming that support because that's the only support they can get.
They're jumping from sort of going from 0 to 100 very, very quickly. Yeah, it's really interesting, Jack, that you mentioned that. And I do think there needs to be, and it's within our interests as a society to say, can you do some work, for example? I've used this example before, but my best mate has got multiple sclerosis. Some days she wakes up, she feels great, do a full day's work, fine. Most days that's not the case. Some days she can't do anything. Other days she can do maybe 2 hours work or something. And there's loads of work. It's not every single job that people do is time sensitive. There are loads of things that you can sit at a computer maybe 2 hours a day, or do as much as you feel you can do to actually contribute in some way. And I just think the system has to adapt, because there's flexible working in lots of ways. Well, let's do flexible working for people who can work some of the time because of their health. We'll return to this and let me know your thoughts about it. 0344 499 1000. We're going to talk about Louise Hay next. She was the Transport Secretary until about 28 hours ago. Bill in Romsey says, am I surprised by Louise Hay? No. Government lied to the people. Rachel Reeves lied on her CV. Starmer lied about his freebies. There is more to come. Also, Matt in Hove says, anyone who thinks the Louise Hay charge is a simple mistake is a fool. Aviva wouldn't have escalated to the police for a simple mistake. The police would have scaled down the charge from fraud to a simple mistake. There is way more to this than one mobile phone she switched on after finding it in a drawer. Well, we know that at least 3 phones were involved with this. The Times has reported that. Also, if it's her work phone, why was it switched off and in a drawer while it was her current work phone, says Matt in Hove. I think there is more to come out about this. We'll talk about the political handling of this and perhaps the future or lack of future for Louise Hay. Maybe you didn't even know she was a Transport Secretary. She's certainly very noticeable with her red hair, but actually, was this a hit job against her? Had it been brewing for months? What about Heidi Alexander, the new Transport Secretary? She is the godmother of ULEZ. Are you worried about that? Stay with us here on Talk. We'll talk to Matthew and Jack about that in just a minute.
It is quite extraordinary, isn't it, that he should have carried on with appointing Louise Hay, given what has now come out.
Yeah.
Just remarkable. Not a very good look in a cabinet position, but there we are. We've seen so much incompetence, naivety within this government, just within 4.5, 5 months.
Yeah.
Nobody can believe the chaos that is descending.
Smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to Mike on Twitter. He says, come on, Peter, I know you said Kirsty Wark is a mate. I mean, she's not, I wouldn't say we're friends. I know her. I used to work on Newsnight a while ago. She's been very good to me at various points. Helped me out with a flat at one stage, as in pointing me in the direction of going to live somewhere. But anyway, that's not the point. The point is that Mike says, come on, Peter, I know you said Kirsty is a mate, but to believe that she felt she couldn't speak up about Greg Wallace at the time is beyond ridiculous. So the question remains, why did she not? Adrian says, for me, the whole Greg Wallace thing is pathetic. So he's the embarrassing uncle who often says something inappropriate and people were made to feel uncomfortable. So what? If they didn't like it, they should learn to stand up for themselves, grow up and stop being such pathetic victims. Adrian, are you aware of the whole allegations here? This wasn't just someone making like a dodgy remark. This is about people being, allegedly sexually, being groped sexually, alleged sexual assault here. And also the fact that, dancing around a set naked. I mean, that is just so beyond anything that should ever happen. Robert says, hi Peter, more important than allegations regarding Greg Wallace are the facts that the BBC nominated a man as the World for Woman Footballer and nominated a terrorist supporting group Kneecap for a 2025 Music Award, says Rob in Belfast. Kneecap are an absolutely disgraceful bunch of musicians who say and broadcast all sorts of and put out music which is just absolutely horrendous, and I don't think they should receive government money. I don't think they should be promoted by the BBC. I don't think people should watch their film. I think they're awful people, and they're basically excusing terrorism as far as I can see, in my strongly held personal view. Matthew and Jack, let's talk about Louise Hay, who is, or was, the Transport Secretary, and the handling of all of this. Her stolen phone was actually used to call relatives. She was convicted of fraud after a mobile phone that she had reported to police as stolen was used to call one of her relatives. She resigned as Transport Secretary yesterday morning. What do you make of this affair, Jack?
I think the question is, has she lied at any point, whether in public or to Starmer? Because the sources close to the Prime Minister have refused to say whether Starmer believes that she was fully candid with him or not, which suggests there must be more to it. On the face of it, this doesn't really seem like a resigning matter. I mean, there was no sentence, of course, but she's served her punishment in the sense that she got that discharge. She declared it when she joined the shadow cabinet. She's under no obligation to declare it when she becomes an MP because it wasn't a custodial sentence. So it doesn't seem like there's any reason to sack her. It's not as if she's the minister responsible for fraud. Maybe then you could argue there's something of a conflict of interest. So it feels like there must be more to it. We know that there's some suggestion that, it's because she's...
Do you honestly think she could have continued as a Secretary of State with this in the public domain? Do you honestly think that could happen and Labour could have weathered this storm and say we stand by her?
Yeah, I think they could. I just think it's something of a non-story.
I don't think it's a non-story at all. They have said, probity. Sorry, I do want to let you have your say, Jack, but they've said probity is a massive thing. Transparency is a massive thing for them. They haven't been transparent. They haven't had probity on this, for example. I mean, that is something that is a pertinent fact in regard to someone.
If she declared it as it happened when she joined the shadow cabinet, then that's all she's obliged to do.
She's public, though.
No, but she's not obliged to do that, is she?
Shouldn't we know all the facts about politicians?
Not if it's spent.
Boris Johnson remained Prime Minister after Partygate and after being in trouble.
Oh, look, I am not defending him. I'm not defending the Conservatives whatsoever.
I suppose the issue is that she called for Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak to resign.
It's the hypocrisy angle.
Yeah, okay, I kind of get that. But I'm more interested in the politics of this because, again, I feel like Starmer has clearly used her as an example to other cabinet ministers that if you find yourself in trouble, don't expect me to stand by you. You're going to be out.
Some would say that ruthlessness is actually good leadership. What do you think?
Well, maybe it is, but there's a character that perhaps your viewers and listeners may not be aware of called Morgan McSweeney. He's Starmer's chief of staff, and the Times is reporting that he asked her to, or advised her to resign when Number 10 became concerned that she'd not revealed all the details.
What's his job?
It may be that that's his job, but I just have a sneaking suspicion that Starmer wasn't. I know he appointed her to his cabinet, but that he wasn't really a massive fan of hers in the first place. That she was perhaps the most left wing of his cabinet ministers, and now it's almost a totally Blairite cabinet for good or ill. But I thought she was actually a pretty effective Transport Secretary. So in that sense, I'm sorry to see her go.
She wasn't very effective when she was talking about P&O. She managed to scupper a massive investment deal.
That wasn't great. I have to say though that I think Heidi Alexander is a good. I personally think. I don't live in London, so I've not had to deal with ULEZ, but I personally think she's got quite a good reputation, Heidi Alexander. No? The
godmother of ULEZ. I don't think she's got a particularly good reputation with our viewers and listeners who are generally pretty anti-ULEZ. Why do you think she'll be a good Transport Secretary?
Whenever on the occasion I've seen her on TV, etc., I thought that she's always come across very well and very sensible and very pragmatic. and ultimately we've got to do something about climate change. So I know I can say this as I don't live in London, but from an outsider, I'm always rather in favour of ULEZ, to be honest.
Well, not a charge that you have never had to pay.
True.
Matthew, and there are lots of small businesses and people and trying to get to and from work who have to pay £12.50 a day and are not very happy about it. Jack, and it's not just London actually, it's right throughout the UK. There are various schemes, low traffic neighbourhoods and so on. It's a very controversial issue. Jack, what do you make of this in regard to Heidi Alexander?
Well, I think she's a good pick. I mean, she's someone who cares about transport, has a passion for transport, wants to get more transport infrastructure built. I always feel whenever we're on together there's too much agreement, but I agree that I don't have much of a problem with ULEZ. I mean, I think people driving polluting vehicles need to stop expecting other people to pay for the pollution that they're causing.
Absolutely.
So I don't necessarily have a problem with that. I think it's
What do you mean pay for the pollution they're causing? What do you mean by that?
Well, their vehicles are polluting. The community at large has to deal with the consequences of that through lower quality of air and through the effect that has on climate change too. And everybody else has to pay for that if you don't have some sort of charge to account for the fact that you are causing that damage if you are driving a polluted vehicle. It's not my responsibility as someone who, I don't drive. It's not my responsibility. It's not our responsibility then
I think
to pick up the tab
basically every driver basically every driver who watches and listens to the station would disagree with you. Although maybe you agree. Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. Let's talk about migration for a second, because net migration has hit a record high of almost 1 million last year. Do you think the Labour government is going to get a grip on this, Jack?
Well, it seems to be coming down anyway, doesn't it, because of the measures brought in under the Tories to stop master students in particular from bringing family members over. So I think it is likely to continue falling, and it may well be the case that Labour get to actually take credit for stuff that really happened on the Tories' watch. The numbers are very, very alarming. I'm not someone who's particularly anti-migration, but if you've got best part of 1 million people coming into the country, and we've built 240,000 or are on track to build 240,000 houses this year. It's nowhere near enough. Our infrastructure is creaking as it is. I think we need to be much more disciplined about who we're letting into the country, and we need to be much more picky, if you like, because there are, house building. The Labour government wants to get house building up. We don't have the skills currently to build those houses, so we are going to need immigrants to do that. And there are other sectors of the economy. Well, yeah.
That's the problem.
But hopefully they can build more, can make a bigger contribution to supply than they take away in terms of demand. I certainly think that can be the case. And there are other sectors of the economy where that's true as well. So we need a more targeted approach. And I think for most of the Conservatives' time in office, that wasn't the approach. It was basically let's get in as many immigrants as possible to distort the GDP figures so that we can say that the economy is growing when in fact in per capita terms it is shrinking. So we need a quality, not quantity approach to migration.
There is good migration and bad migration, isn't there, Matthew?
There absolutely is. I mean, I totally get the house building and infrastructure point. I agree with that, but much to the chagrin, I know, Peter, of your viewers and listeners, I am pretty liberal on migration.
No.
I know.
Really?
Shocker.
What?
Shocker. Absolute shocker. But yeah, I mean, I genuinely think that, absolutely, if there are people that are here that shouldn't be, we need to deal with that. But broadly speaking, I think we absolutely need migrants for the NHS and for lots of other industries as well. The NHS would collapse if we didn't have migration. So yeah, I mean, I'm pretty liberal on all of this, I have to say.
Thank you very much indeed also to both our members of our panel, Matthew Hulbert, who's a Liberal Democrat activist and host of the Political Frenemies podcast, and also Jack Rowlett, who is a political commentator. Thank you for joining me in the studio.